Sam Monson, Pro Football Focus lead NFL analyst. Sam, good morning. Thanks for joining us. Let me start with that question. The Hall of Fame, it feels like, is based off of the feelings we have for these players. When the writers get together and they nominate somebody, they're very passionate about it. You deal with analytics. Just the analytical part of this with Phillip Rivers. Is he a first ballot Hall of Famer?
I think it's tough because you're comparing him to the guys from bygone eras for whom we don't really have all that data. I mean, one of the great things about PFF, whether you agree with our numbers or you disagree with them, is we have the grading on every single player, on every single play since we started doing this back in 2006. So we can at least try and compare these guys like for like, but it gets really hard when you start trying to say, all right, Phillip Rivers just passed Dan Marino on the all-time passing yards list. But I don't think there's anybody out there that saw both those guys play that would say Phillip Rivers is a better quarterback than Dan Marino. Dan Marino was obviously a Hall of Famer, and no one would argue that. But because of this explosion in passing and how much easier it is to play quarterback in today's NFL and how all these guys are now at the top of the all-time lists, does that put Phillip Rivers in? I don't know.
Who's more of a first ballot Hall of Famer, Frank Gore or Phillip Rivers?
I think Phillip Rivers. I think Frank Gore's legacy is this insane durability that really is remarkable when you look at what he was as a prospect. Like he dropped in the draft because people were concerned that he'd had multiple knee surgeries and that he wouldn't last in the NFL. And then the defining characteristic of Frank Gore is there's nothing that can knock this guy out of the league, and he just keeps on trucking.
Well, same thing with Phillip Rivers. He hasn't missed a game.
True. But I think Phillip Rivers' peaks have been higher than Frank Gore's. I think you can make the case that Phillip Rivers has been genuinely one of the best quarterbacks over the past, over his entire career. I don't know that you can really make that case for Frank Gore outside of a season or two.
If you were going to redraft this first round, I saw where you looked at the first round and went back and looked at how these rookies are performing. Is there somebody that stands out that they would have changed the draft? That they would have gone either higher or lower based on after 8 games how they performed where they were drafted?
I think Minnesota's Justin Jefferson would definitely be higher up the list than he is now. He might be the first receiver off the board if we had a chance to redo all this. All of his concerns when we were looking at him as a college prospect, it's he did incredibly from the slot, but can he play outside? Excuse me. Can he play outside when he has to deal with press coverage? Can he still get off the line? Can he still do all that savvy route running stuff? The answer is overwhelmingly yes. And that just immediately puts you further up the draft because you're a more impactful player when you can play outside and deal with the press coverage at the NFL level. He's been an absolute superstar at wide receiver, and I think very much the match of any of those top first-round guys.
Highest grade you've given to a rookie this year is who?
I think right now it's actually Michael Onwenu, the New England Patriots, I guess, utility offensive lineman, because he's played 3 different positions and done them all well. But this was not a highly touted draft pick. He's just come in and been an absolute force, particularly in the run game, and filled in wherever they've need him, whether it's right tackle, whether it's the guard position, and really been phenomenal. I mean, I've seen people say that if this guy was a first rounder, we'd be talking about how New England's draft was fantastic because they snagged this Pro Bowl, all pro caliber player right at the top of the draft. But because he's a lower round guy, it's kind of passing almost unnoticed.
Higher grade for Joe Burrow or Justin Herbert?
It's funny because they're in almost exactly the same spot. They're really tight together in terms of grading, but the grade comes about in almost completely opposite ways. Joe Burrow has been incredibly consistent, particularly up to the sort of deep big shots. Anything below 20 yards, he's been absolute money, and has been doing it in the face of incredible pressure in Cincinnati. Justin Herbert is like the king of the volatile stats. So whether it's third down play, whether it's deep throws down the field, whether it's, all those big time throws and those kinds of things, the PFF charts, he's been phenomenal at those things, but has missed more regular easy throws, missed more of the kind of consistently easy stuff than Joe Burrow has. And he's been dealing with pressure as well. And it kind of nets out to almost the exact same PFF grade overall.
What about Clyde Edwards-Helaire? His grade and where he probably should have been taken, even though he is a running back?
Yeah, and that's really the thing is, PFF is in this analytics group that would say, look, just don't take a running back in the first round. It's not that they won't ever look good, it's that they just won't justify that draft slot. You could get him later on in the draft or get a comparable player later on in the draft, and you'd see the same kind of production. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing from Clyde Edwards-Helaire. His grade is okay. He's had good games, but really what we're seeing is this product of the Kansas City offense. And when that thing is ticking along, when it's going great, when Mahomes is playing out of his mind and Andy Reid is scheming up all these plays, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a good player to have on the receiving end of those catches out of the backfield and be taking the carries. But when things don't go as well, he has those worse games and just doesn't look as good. Running backs are basically a product of their environment within the offense.
He's Sam Monson, Pro Football Focus lead NFL analyst. Who do you consider the best running back in the NFL?
I think right now it's Dalvin Cook. Again, what I just said, running backs are by and large a product of their environment. He's the one guy this season that isn't. I mean, he's been massively overperforming what the Vikings have been giving him in terms of, yards. He has by far, I think, the most yards after contact in the NFL, and only himself and Derrick Henry have more total yards than Dalvin Cook has yards after contact. He's just consistently generating an incredible amount of yardage off his own back beyond what is being blocked for him.
We brought this up a couple of days ago. I asked the audience, you could have any wide receiver for the next 5 years. Who do you think they picked?
DK.
Yes.
DK Metcalf. Yeah.
Did his slippage in the draft and his profile, was it just based off he looks like he should be great, but he's always injured? Is that what it boiled down to?
No, I think there were legitimate concerns about his change of direction skills. He went to the combine and posted this 3-cone time that was slower than Tom Brady. It was, historically bad. And he fixed it a little bit at his pro day. Like, he got faster. The one at the combine, he slipped a little bit and they don't let you take it again. So it was a bad time there. He improved it at his pro day, but it still wasn't good. It was still a concern, as was his 20 shuttle times. Anything that was trying to measure change of direction, he was really bad at. And I think that leads you to think, well, okay, does that limit him at the next level to just being this linear vertical threat guy who can't really run the entire route tree? Even considering that, I think most draft analysts had him going higher than he went in the draft. It was still a shock to see him slip as far as he did. But I think there were real concerns about, a missing component to his game that just has been changed, that isn't a missing component anymore.
When does Pro Football Focus do a deep dive into Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields?
I mean, we've got guys cranking on that right now. We grade every college game as well. So we've got grades on all of these guys. Mike Renner is our big draft guy. He's been the guy grinding on that every single game of those guys' careers. So I don't know if we have a specific deep dive article up on the site, but we've definitely got data on all those guys right now.
Are they working in that room behind that door behind you?
Yeah, that's a room that goes downstairs into a basement where there's just one little light hanging out of the ceiling. That's where we put all the analysts.
Worst starting quarterback in the NFL is who?
The worst starting quarterback. I mean, I think you can say it was Dwayne Haskins before he lost his job. Now it's going to be a battle between, Sam Darnold in New York, Drew Lock in Denver. It hasn't shown enough really to get out of that conversation. It's those kind of young guys that have disappointed in bad situations so far.
And I thought this was Drew Lock's coming out party, and they had weapons, and here we go with Drew Lock. I know he got injured, but it feels like, Sam, that the window of opportunity is about 2 years. Like, Baker Mayfield's in his third year, and it feels like he's playing for his future in Cleveland. Are you guys getting the sense of how long that window is for a quarterback to prove himself?
I think, this run of quarterbacks that have been successful right away have definitely changed the opinion of how long you get. And if you don't show something almost right away, you have to fight pretty hard for that job, particularly if you're not a top pick. If you're a number one overall pick, you get a little bit more time to show something. But if you're not, you get a year or two and then we got to move on. It's time to find the next guy, because the landscape is different to the way it was a decade ago. You're not in a spot anymore where you have to give Alex Smith a $100 million contract because the prospect of not having Alex Smith is so terrifying. You can find those guys pretty easily now. And so teams are much more emboldened to say, all right, this guy is not a Hall of Famer. He's not the next All-Pro we need. We're going to cut bait and move on to the next guy.
Do you remember when we sort of took a player for granted the way we do Patrick Mahomes? And this feels like the embryonic stages of Michael Jordan's greatness when he had team success. Prior to that, he was sort of just a highlight reel phenomenon. Then they started winning, and it felt like we got bored with the story. And then Karl Malone won an MVP, and Charles Barkley won an MVP. Are we at that stage with Patrick Mahomes where, and I know Russell has played extremely well, but are we at the point where we're taking Patrick Mahomes for granted?
And I'll give you one in the NFL as well. I think we've already passed that point with Aaron Donald. I think, Aaron Donald should have won every Defensive Player of the Year award since his rookie season. So not the rookie season, but everyone since then should have gone to Aaron Donald. And they haven't, because we've just gotten bored giving the award to Aaron Donald, who is by far and away the best defensive player in the NFL. I think he's the best player.
Now, how do you gauge that, though, Sam?
I mean, to me, it's how much further ahead is he than the rest of his peers at his position, right? So it's really hard to compare positions to say the best defensive lineman in the NFL is better than the best linebacker, is better than the best safety, the best receiver. So let's just stick to his position group and say, how much better is he than Fletcher Cox or Chris Jones or whoever else the next interior guy is? And I think it's light years ahead of those guys when you consider how much more pressure he gets, how much more pressure he gets on a rate basis, and how much more he's double teamed than some of those guys, and still doing that. It's absolutely unbelievable. And just in terms of PFF grading, the top X seasons in terms of PFF grades on the interior have all been Aaron Donald. It's just a list of Aaron Donald seasons that vary slightly. So I think you're right, though. I think Mahomes is reaching that category where you need to watch him again to remind yourself that, like, this isn't normal. Most quarterbacks don't do this, and we should remember that this guy is a singularly unique talent. Otherwise, we will get bored with him the same way we do with Aaron Donald.
Sam, good to talk to you. Enjoy
Anytime.
the weekend.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sam Monson, Pro Football Focus lead NFL analyst.